Hi, I'm sure you know the story about the tourist who was lost and asked the local the directions to some monument or other, and the local said, "Well, this is not the best place to start from." And that's how I feel a little bit about the grammar syllabus. It's not the best place to start from in terms of the course of second language instruction. I just want to give 9 reasons why I think this is the case. And the first one I'll call the kind of the process versus product problem. If you think about it, the grammar syllabus is derived from a linguist's description of the language. It's derived after the event. It's the product, if you like. But it doesn't tell us anything about the process by which this grammar is internalized, either in the first language or the second language. I like to use the analogy of an omelette. If you've never made an omelette before, could you make one by just looking at an omelette and trying to infer its ingredients and the processes that went by? Or even worse, would you chop an existing omelette up into little pieces and then try to put them all back together again? One linguist described this as the Humpty Dumpty effect. It's very easy to break language up into little pieces, but it's much more difficult to put them back together again. So if we are using a linguist's description of the language, or one at least derived from a linguist's description of the language, we're focusing on the product, but not the process. It's not the learner's grammar of the language. It's not the evolving grammar that the learner experiences. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, I would call the corpus argument, simply because it's informed by what we now know from exhaustive studies using corpora of real language use, both spoken and written. And what we've discovered, or what corpus analysts have discovered, is that there's only a very weak relationship between the grammatical information that you get out of a corpus and what is enshrined in typical course books. The balance between the different areas of grammar is completely skewed. We're still focused almost 100% on the verb phrase in teaching English, whereas the noun phrase, if you look at any grammar of English based on a corpus, it covers a vast number of more pages in the grammar. And similarly, within the verb phrase, we have this obsession of conflating both tense and aspect. But corpus linguistics shows us that, in fact, these inherited grammars are only accidentally aligned with how language is actually used. And related to that is the third argument, which I would call the spoken versus written argument. Again, corpus linguistics have shown that there's quite a big difference between the grammar of spoken English and the grammar of written English. But in the past, we've tended to teach the grammar of written English for both writing and speaking. For example, we encourage learners to use backshift in reported speech. She said she had been there yesterday, which very rarely occurs in spoken language. So again, the grammar syllabus, in its traditional form at least, is a syllabus of written grammar rather than spoken grammar. And related to that is what I call the phraseological argument, for want of a better term. We now know, if we didn't before, that language, English, is made up of, yes, sentence grammar, and yes, words, but there's a vast area in between, which is sort of not really grammar and certainly not words, but it is conventionalized, the way that words go together in collocations and formulaic language and chunks, whatever you want to call them. And this is a huge area of language, which is not represented in sentence grammar, as enshrined in the typical grammar syllabus, nor, of course, in vocabulary, apart from a little bit of work on collocations or whatever. So this is the kind of gray area that's missing from the grammar syllabus, and yet is huge. some estimates say maybe 60% of spoken language consists of formulaic chunks. So this is lost. It falls between the cracks in the traditional grammar syllabus. And related to that is what I call the emergence argument, the argument that language evolves and emerges out of the experience of using language, both in the first language acquisition and second language acquisition. It's through exposure to this chunk-like language that learners slowly extrapolate the kinds of structures and rules that we call grammar. That is to say, grammar is a byproduct of communication. It's not the prerequisite for communication. So maybe by working from a grammar syllabus, we've kind of got things, we put the cart before the horse, if you like, teaching grammar in advance of communication when grammar emerges from communication. And another effect of the grammar syllabus is the focus on forms. Mike Long's term to describe the traditional grammatical syllabus, which is a checklist of forms, but the focus is on forms, not on meanings. But it is meanings that learners want to express. But if you focus your syllabus around a series of forms, like present simple, past perfect, third conditional, or whatever, the tendency is to focus on the formal aspects of the language at the expense of the meanings. And along with that is what I've called the grammar McNuggets argument. This, the way that the grammar syllabus divides up the language into these granular chunks, these individual grammar McNuggets that are then delivered to the learners, consumed by the learners, much in the way that fast food is delivered and consumed. And what it does is encourage a kind of transmissive model of teaching, one in which knowledge is delivered, rather than a more reciprocal or dialogic model of teaching, where knowledge is co-constructed. Another argument against the grammar syllabus is what I call the implicit versus explicit argument. Presumably, our aim as teachers of a second language is to build a kind of feel for the language, a bit like the feel we have for our mother tongue. We know what is right, we know what is wrong, we can't necessarily say why. It is that feel for the language which is called implicit knowledge. But a grammar syllabus, by laying out all the grammatical structures, encourages a teaching that is explicit teaching of explicit knowledge. And research has demonstrated exhaustively that explicit knowledge, yes, it may play a part in second language learning, but it is clumsy, it's awkward, it's slow to retrieve and deploy. It works in favor of accuracy, perhaps, but certainly not in favor of fluency. Whereas implicit knowledge feeds into fluent production and real-time communication. And that's perhaps what we should be focusing on, not at the expense necessarily of some explicit knowledge. But the grammatical syllabus, because it is explicit, tempts us down the explicit teaching route. And finally, all of this kind of conspires to form a backwash effect, where if course books are written around grammatical syllabuses, they tend to favor grammar in every aspect of the teaching of English, including the teaching of the skills, so that the texts are chosen or written to embody specific features of grammar, the grammar of the week, as it were. And not surprisingly, therefore, texts in course books lose a kind of authentic feel and often are about subject matter which is of secondary interest. In-flight magazines with grammar notes, as one writer describe them. Now, I'm not saying don't teach grammar. What I'm saying is maybe we shouldn't prioritize grammar as the starting point of instruction the way that the grammar syllabus implies. It's not the best place to start from.